Welcome or welcome back to day 21 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Let's jump on ahead into our game here today and see who our opponent's going to be. So today we have an opponent from, it's the Philippines, called AMD 1216, and they are rated 1393. We will play this as per usual here and probably look for a normal kind of Queen's Gambit decline setup. Alternatively, we could look for something like this, which could be interesting and fun in its own right, but I'm not all that familiar in those lines. So I think today at least we will go like this. And they proceed to transpose into the London system. So what do we decide to do here? We could just try to go after their bishop straight away, which would be an interesting way of doing it. The thing I like here is it would kind of pull our opponent out of their comfort zone. They would probably proceed to play their bishop like this, and we would maybe get a trade. I suspect this is not the most accurate move here, but I like pulling our opponent out of their preparation. So let's go on ahead and just play our knight to h5. And I think we don't want to push our pawn here, at least. If they move the bishop, then we just go for the trade. It's probably not going to favor us straight away, as we have all our pawns here in the middle or the center on dark squares, but we might move them up like this, for example. Fianchettoing here perhaps even, and getting our pawns on the opposite color of our remaining bishop. This knight is a bit off center now, but I don't think that's going to be a massive problem for us. We could look at an expansion like this, for example, and getting our pieces out behind it. We might look at an immediate castle. I expect our opponent to play this, and typically speaking, c5 is strong against the London here, and we have our queen on this diagonal, so we might as well just immediately target their center. This is a bit more aggressive than we typically play, but I'm curious to see how that's going to work out for us today. So here I'm probably just expecting this, but they move their pawn up, seeming to look for a fianchetto of their own. How about we mirror their idea? Alternatively, I don't really mind this move. Fianchettoing here I don't think actually helps our opponent that much, because it would close down the diagonal for their fianchetted bishop. We do have a kind of semi-cage for our own bishop as well, but we'll probably try to break out at some point. And here I'm actually even liking this move, simply to remove any possibilities of a check here, but also to deny our opponent the possibility of playing c4, trying to poke away at this and opening up their diagonal. So let's go on ahead and play this, and I'm expecting a castle here, I think. So now we have to make a decision here. We could take, we could push, we could even... Probably the most critical move here is castling. We could move our pieces out here. But we will probably be solid here and just castle. They finish their little London pyramid here with the pawns. And now we have to make a decision here. How do we proceed with our development? This would target their pawn, but I'm also liking the idea of going here with our knight to d7 and potentially getting into their weak spots here around c4 as well. This would also defend this pawn in one more way. Or we could move our a pawn. Our offside knight here on h5 could also get reintroduced to the game, going to e4 perhaps. But let's just move our knight first here before we decide on anything else. So what happens here if they take... I don't see a lot of follow-up. This rook move here probably seems to play e4. I think we can maybe just kill off the idea of playing e4, by moving our knight to f6. And then if they push, then we capture, and they can't really recapture, but they will probably try keeping on playing for the move by moving their knight away. Then I guess this move is probably inevitable, but we could delay it and simultaneously get our knight into a better spot by playing knight h to f6 here. I think last time we were in a similar position to this. We played our c pawn and captured d4, and our opponent proceeded to capture with their e pawn. And if they do so, they can't really target our pawns with their own pawns anymore. If we open up this, I think I don't mind creating play on the queen side here. We aren't quite fully developed here, but neither is our opponent, I think. Let's just go ahead and capture and see how they respond. Here I noticed this capture with the knight was probably really good, as it would have targeted our weakness here afterwards and opened up their bishop, but luckily they played the move we wanted them to. Which is not really how we should play chess, to be honest. We shouldn't play our moves hoping for our opponent to play what we want them to, but it worked out in this case. So here we are probably looking to connect our rook soon. And I think our bishop might do a good job at doing so. Essentially moving it to either the b7 square here, or alternatively, we could move a5 here, put our bishop behind our pawn, and move our rooks to b8 and c8, and then push our advantage here on the queen side, or rather push for an advantage. So what happens if we play a5 here? Is it too slow, or does this work out for us? I'm not seeing any immediate threats here apart from knight to e5, after which if we take, then they take with their pawn most likely, I think. And we could drop our knight back here, but then we have to be careful of an attack here on our king. I'm not seeing how that's necessarily all that dangerous for us as of yet, so I think we'll go ahead and try playing what we thought about here. Getting our pieces into the game here on the queen side. and getting our rooks onto better files. This rook on the A file might just want to stay there for the time being, but the other rook, however, might want to move into a better position. And after our opponent moves their knight up here, we might not even need to respond. They could capture, after which we would recapture. But what if we just play our bishop to b7, covering their most powerful remaining knight jump here, and then we just proceed with our plans, as this doesn't really do a lot unless we let it. Let's go ahead and proceed with our plan. Here we would have to decide whether we want to recapture with our knight or our queen, but I think the queen recapture is probably a lot better, as this knight serves a lot of good purposes. Defending our king, having the option here of jumping into the middle, and being quite well centralized, I think, while also being defended. This knight here from our opponent can't really jump into the game all that easily, but they decide to try to go for a knight maneuver here by playing their knight to f3. This closes up their bishop. They might try to play their knight to this square, but I'm not seeing any threats there. So let's just go on ahead and move our f rook to c8 probably, preparing for the eventual breaking apart of our opponent's pawn structure. As we kind of prophesized earlier on, our opponent's bishop doesn't do all that much right now, but neither does ours. So it seems like we've got a slow and positional game on our hands today, which I'm liking. Their queen move here seems to hit our pawn. If I'm going to be honest with you here, I'm liking the idea of playing our bishop to a6 here, threatening a discovered attack on their queen, but also probably playing on the c and b files with our rooks, because now we've got this c6 square covered by our other piece here, namely our rook, so we don't need our bishop on b7. Here our opponent could try to play a quite non-existent threat, moving their knight into g5, but our own knight covers this square, so they don't really have a checkmate threat on our king. And we don't have our rook here anymore either, so we could just run out if they went for that either way. So here I guess our opponent has to make a decision as to what to do with their rooks, or they might just keep on moving their other pieces around. We could potentially see pawn play by our opponent, but not as of yet apparently. I'm liking the idea of playing rook to b8 and potentially even looking for a long-term double up here. b4 might be a good move, but it wouldn't really allow our opponent to respond with a pawn move of their own, I think. So let's see what happens if we move here. think it might be a bit premature, because eventually if this opens up, our rook is currently in the line of their bishop, and it's not doing a lot behind our own bishop. So how about we just try to improve our position slightly before moving into the eventual madness that might ensue in this game here. Eventually there will probably be a big brawl here, and pieces will get traded off and the board will open up, I guess, but that's not yet. And I think we are the ones deciding when and how that happens, unless our opponent finds a good plan here. They find the non-existent threat here, and currently I'm not really seeing what their knight move does, but however, I was going to say it would force them to recapture here with their pawn, but they might go with their rook. And I'm not really liking that, but I see here, though, our opponent is threatening capturing f7. Which might just mean we will have to capture with our knight here, and if they capture with their pawn, I don't think that's too bad for us. What I am a bit worried about, however, is if they capture with their rook here, as they might try to slide on over and coordinate all the pieces for a king attack. I'm not seeing any better defense against this threat here on f7 though, so we will go ahead and play like this. They do indeed recapture with the rook. I'm noticing here this move might be interesting. We would hit their rook here, and we also hit their knight. We wouldn't really hit their knight though, as their queen is defending. But they would have to move their rook. I'm not really seeing all that much merit from that move. The thing I wanted to enable initially is this potential fork here, moving up to f6. But that's not quite possible. So let's go ahead and create some counterplay on the other side here, as our pieces are currently in the game, and this will disallow doubling up by our opponent and bringing the other rook into an attack on our king. As we looked at earlier on, they can't push the pawn as we have our bishop on this diagonal now. And as thus our opponent can't really open up this diagonal for their bishop. They tried to do so earlier on by playing for a push with their e-pawn, but luckily that worked in our favor as our opponent recaptured like this earlier on. And here I'm kind of curious as to what our opponent does, but I'm hoping they move their queen, honestly. Because if they do move their queen off of this diagonal here, I think this move might actually come with a threat, hitting both the rook and the knight at the same time. Which is not an easy move to spot when you're looking at all other stuff, all the other things in the position. It's easier for us to spot. f4 by our opponent. That's basically a move seeking to tell us they are looking for a fist fight. Which I don't necessarily mind, but I want to do so in a controlled fashion. Here I'm actually looking at an interesting idea. Moving our bishop back and looking for this move, which could have trapped their rook, forcing this, but they would have had this file open here, which I don't really like. So let's go ahead and keep up with our previous plans here, and now they have a weakness. What would our opponent do here if we just go for their pawn? I think we could play our queen out here to a3. It's not really serving an important role here on the other side. And this also hits their pawn over here and threatens other types of infiltrations. If we move here, they could defend by going back and potentially threatening pushing and having a discovered attack on our queen. So I think instead we might as well just double up here. We have to be a bit more careful now with our time expenditure, as we are down to 4.5 minutes. But I think we should be fine in that regard. Now I'm once again looking at the potential queen move here, which would potentially also threaten this move. What happens after they move their rook like this? Honestly, I'm not quite sure, but even an idea like this is interesting, because then they have to look at defending their a2 pawn as well. And here we are kind of shifting the momentum of the game, I'm noticing, and I'm liking what I'm seeing, because we are on the offensive instead of our opponent. I would potentially like to play h6 at some point here, but I don't want to get their knight into the game. Because honestly, it's not serving a purpose where it's currently standing, but at some point if we push it back, we might force it to block its own bishop, which might be advantageous to us. Otherwise it would have to just completely remove itself from the game by going to h3, which I'm thinking would be a welcome sight for us. I do notice we probably had a good threat here now, a tactic which we looked at earlier. Because of the positioning of our opponent's queen, we could have moved our knight up here, and after they captured or moved their queen, we would have had f6 forking their pieces. So our move might have been a bit rushed, but considering our time remaining, I don't necessarily mind it. Does our opponent intend to sack here? Actually, I'm noticing they could always recapture with their knight here. What does this move do? I'm honestly not seeing how this works out for our opponent. So let's say we play our other rook here, and they, let's say, sack on this square. Then I'm not really seeing the follow-up. But honestly, I don't mind just kicking the knight out first here. Now their pieces are probably going to be a bit awkwardly placed. Unless they have some interesting idea of a sack here. They go for the sack, but I'm not seeing how they would follow up. This wins another pawn, but we would capture and we would still be up a piece. So this is on our opponent to kind of show us why their move is a good one. Otherwise we are probably going to have a comfortable position here, being up a piece. I'm happy to see here our bishop covers this square, so our opponent can't immediately bring their queen into their desired attack. And we still have a lot of pressure on their pawns on the queen side. Following our opponent's last move here, I'm really hoping we could try to force a rook trade by playing our rook to b2 here. After which our opponent would probably have to respond with their own rook to c2. Depending on what they play now, of course. They go for this. They have probably calculated something here, but where would they go ahead and move? I'm not quite seeing it. So then after we move our rook here to c8, what is our opponent's threat? We do also have this fork. I think I like this a bit better, as it forces some material off the board. Any trades here should probably favor us. Or most trades at least, because they do have 3 pawns for the piece, but at the same time, that's probably not too bad for us considering our activity. And our opponent's pawns are not all that connected. So do we have a queen capture here? I think we probably do. Taking the queens off the board here is probably going to be pretty good for us. And we cover our 2 last ranks here. If we go for this, our opponent could try to double up. But I'm not really seeing their follow-up. So we do get to this position. And here we are probably going to try to hunt some pawns. What's the best position for our bishop? I think we might try to reposition it around our king, perhaps, to keep it a bit safer and give it a long diagonal. And we would also like it on this diagonal, perhaps, to prevent any queen movement, any pawn movement by our opponent. Honestly, I'm really liking the material imbalance in this position, as we have 3 pawns for a bishop here, because those kinds of I'm just blanking out here. Those kinds of material imbalances typically tend to lead to interesting positions like this, where we have to either side tries to prove why their material is superior to the other person's material. This rook to c8 move seems a bit decent, or we could look for rook to b3 even. Then our opponent can't defend like this, but they might check our king. But after checking our king, I'm not seeing any defensive maneuver that saves their pawn. So instead, if they go here, we mess up their pawns and their advantage is probably a bit diminished. I wouldn't necessarily call it an advantage either, but their compensation rather for the bishop. The good thing here at least is we have complete control of the light squares in the position here with our bishop. And it's difficult for our opponent to move their pawns onto light squares. I think our opponent has realized here they might have made a slight mistake, but there might be some kind of combination of moves that give them some kind of counterplay. They could potentially try to look for this kind of a position, getting both their rooks into the 8th file or rank, but I think that would be a bit slow and we would have a lot of counterplay against their king in the meantime. We could potentially always also have this kind of a position. And then they might try to escort their pawn with their centralized king, but then I think we do have time to centralize our own king as well. And we could even look for threats here. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded getting our bishop onto d5 or c4 here either, but in a lot of variations it might get targeted or might hang, I guess, so I think being a bit safer here is not a bad thing. This would be met by this, I think. And they would still have the issue of the c3 pawn. So honestly, I have to say here I'm really happy with how our position is looking. It appears as though our opponent was temporarily disconnected there, but luckily they came back. We do have to make a decision here though. If our opponent moves their c1 rook, which rook do we capture with? They go for this, which we looked at, but I think this should favor us. Do they target our rook, or do they move their king up? I think moving their king up is a mistake probably, because we could hit them with their bishop, or honestly what I meant to say was we could get c2 here. They move their king. And do we have rook here perhaps? I think the critical approach here is probably going to be something along the lines of this, blockading the pawn and utilizing our piece advantage to just pile on pressure on it. But what happens if we go here and they push? Then we have this, and I think we should be fine. They check us, and this is essentially forced. And here I think they might play their rook down there, yes. But now I think we might have some counterplay. What happens if we take the outside position here and hit their pawns? Now we might even sack our bishop for their pawn and pick up those in the process, but that might be a bit dangerous. Alternatively, we could move our king. I think we'll move our king first. G4. I think this is not too bad for us. If they push here, we have this move. Our opponent's rook might leave the defense of their pawn. I'm curious as to what's the critical as to what the critical approach here might be. I'm even noticing here if they take, we might have this move as we still threaten their pawn. Well, that's a fork. Yeah, I don't think we have time to think all that much. We will move our king and see what our opponent does. If they move their pawn, I think we win it. They move their king. And I think here we could go pawn hunting, to be honest. Here we have full access to all of their pawns. So honestly, I'm quite optimistic here. But I think a knight... This actually I'm kind of liking. This helps us centralize. What I was going to say here is I think a rook and bishop versus rook endgame is theoretically drawn at least. But that's on a higher level, I think. And also our opponent doesn't have an easy way of getting our pawn here. We could harass their king, but I think we'll hit their pawns instead, forcing them to make moves, which we could then probably look to take advantage of. I think we'll harass them a bit here. I would have liked to play this, but it doesn't quite work. We might reposition our bishop and hit them from behind like we do with our rook here. This is quite scary because we have to find all ways for our opponent to threaten making a queen here with 22 seconds left. If they check, I think this is forced. And now we got a bit more time back. We need to defend our g7 pawn. We might have been able to do so in other ways as well, maybe. We harass their king, I think. Now they have to move to d6, I think. And then we have this move, forking their pawns. But honestly, they go here, but what happens? This would lose our bishop, and this, however, is almost even a checkmate. But what I do like most about it is it forces their king away even more, and then we could try hitting their pawns. They don't have a checkmate threat, at least. This is met with this. And then they can capture our pawn, but we would get theirs as well. This is a really difficult endgame, I'm noticing. This is met with this, and then they threaten this. So we have to move our bishop back. They check us. I think capturing is essentially forced. And this is a good move by our opponent. We can't move here, so we'll have to move away. And here we might have to play for this rook move. Alternatively, we have a draw here. And honestly, considering our time here, I think this might be... There might be other ways of playing this, but I'm not seeing it right now, and with our lack of time, this is what I found. I don't really like playing for draws, but we will still play on though, looking to win this theoretically drawn rook endgame. The way to win is by skewering our opponent's pieces, and I think we'll keep our rook and our king as far away as possible. And honestly, I think our opponents has played this a bit better than us, because they have had a plan of pushing our king further and further back here and looking for a potential checkmate like this. So as our opponent is probably in a better position than us in that regard, I think we might look for a rook trade, unless they blunder. So they might try moving their king towards our rook like this. But I think playing like this might give us a way of getting our king back into the game by playing b2 perhaps. And then we could get to the center. But it seems as though our opponent is not really going to blunder here, so we will probably look for a rook trade, if at all possible. We might be able to cut their king off as well. If they move to the first rank here, we move to b2. Let's say this and this. If they decline the rook trade here, by, for example, checking us like this, then I think we might be able to threaten a checkmate eventually. It's going to depend on our opponent's ability to play rook endgames. If they play their king to the center here, I think it's going to be difficult to make a lot of progress, and then I think we probably look for the immediate rook trade. And in this case, I think if they go like this, I think we just go to the center and try to look for another rook trade, because as their king leaves the side of the board here, it's going to be difficult to make a whole lot of progress. They might try to check us here, but then we just move out of the way. And they might have the threat of trying to move their king opposite ours and then move their rook here, and if their king stands... It seems as though our opponent disbanded or abandoned the game rather. Okay, that brings us up to 1382 ELO for today. Thanks a lot for the game, AMD 1216. And let's go ahead and jump into our game review for today. I see we made a blunder and 2 mistakes, so I'm curious as to where we did so. So I see our accuracies today were essentially the same. We played with an accuracy of 82.5 and our opponent played with an accuracy of 82.6. So I do have to say kudos to our opponent. They played really well today as well. It was difficult to break them, but I'm curious as to whether we might have had some advantage at some point. Maybe we had a better move when we moved into the rook endgame and sacrificed our bishop, but we will have to see. We had a pretty normal opening here, played this slightly offbeat move, which wasn't really blessed by the engine, but we got into this position and we moved out of a typical London position, which was what I wanted. Apparently this move was not so good by us, because if we take, we open up our opponent's rook here if they play a4. And this, if we push for example, then they can take. And I think our pawn might just be a bit overextended perhaps. That might be it. I'm not really sure as to why this is so bad, but it's not as though there is a massive disadvantage for us here. Well, we move here, apparently centralizing our other our other knight rather, earlier on was probably good. I think it's because there are probably a lot of lines here where our opponent could move their knight and create a double threat. For example, if our queen here had moved, we played like this. This capture wasn't entirely blessed here. We should have apparently played our bishop to b7. And we should have even captured here. It seems we were in a slightly disadvantageous position for a while, and here we made a mistake. simply because knight to g5 is supposed to be powerful here. But what happens if we just take this as we have looked at previously? I see it's because this pawn capture is awkward because it forces our knight away, and then our opponent still has this threat here. I'm glad they did not see that, and we got back to equality. b4 was apparently best, even playing it prior to moving our rook. Here we got into this position, which now seems to favor us, and our opponent made a massive mistake here. This was a blunder by us. But why was this so good? Let's try to follow the best line here. If they move their knight back, then we have this move. They would move their rook back. And I guess it's probably just a positional advantage, which is really difficult to evaluate as that massive. It might be a bit above my pay grade, but I guess it makes sense as we slowly seem to decimate their structure here. Well, we didn't go for this, and we made this blunder apparently. Did we have a better, more concrete way of turning this into an advantage, though? We did have an immediate queen to a3. And if our opponent played this natural looking move, apparently we were just positionally decimating our opponent here if we played correctly. It's difficult for me to say because I can't really see how it's that powerful of a position, because we didn't have any material to pick up immediately. But apparently it was pretty good for us. We did play in a similar fashion here, however, and we got a massive advantage off of their sack. We seem to have played correctly, but here it seems as though we made a slight mistake. We should have apparently taken the open file here. Which, I mean, seeing in hindsight is a bit easier. It's a bit easier to say. We went to trade queens and leverage our piece up, but this trade here allowed our opponent to take our pawn as well, which at the time here was a passed pawn. But that's because of the move we played. Well, we got into this position. And I'm noticing even here we would have won a pawn immediately. But I think, at least to me, it made sense winning the more unopposed pawns. I see both of us made some slightly inaccurate moves here. And at this point I'm seeing we went pretty close to equality. They made another mistake and we didn't quite punish it. Bishop to d5, I think it makes sense as it denies our opponent any type of play. But I'm not seeing what we would do in response to them just moving their rook around, checking us, and hitting our bishop eventually. We moved back, apparently getting behind our king was even better. And here we actually had another decent position. Now our opponent had a lead, we were back to equality. They had a lead again. This is what's so fascinating about endgames. We did find the only decent move here, and I'm quite happy we did, sacking the bishop for the equal endgame. and I'm seeing all other moves were essentially losing. Here we just played a series of moves, and I'm seeing they only ever stayed in equality. And then our opponent abandoned the game, and we won our game for today. So once again, thanks a lot for the game, AMD 1216 from the Philippines, and thank you all for watching to the end of the video. I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.